Today, we're going to learn about these. No, not mannequins. Today's lesson is all about the M43 Field Uniform, which was the standard issue uniform for US infantrymen and paratroopers in the ETO during the back half of World War II. So, if you got a project where you'll be painting up some scale model US GI figures, or maybe you just want to learn a little bit about the history of the evolution of World War II uniforms, you're going to want to stay tuned. With that said, let's hop right into it. Alright, so to learn what the US World War II M43 Field Uniform is, we're first going to learn what it is not. Quick history lesson. So, leading up to 1944, and right through the Normandy landings, you're most likely going to see one of three field uniforms on US GIs, and the easiest way to tell them apart is the jacket. The first jacket you might see is what's called the Winter Combat Field Uniform, and this jacket has become synonymous with the US World War II tank crews. It's often just called the tanker jacket. This is the Brad Pitt Fury jacket, elastic collar and cuffs, front zipper, khaki. Though this is not actually khaki, it's actually olive drab number 3, but to help simplify this whole description a little bit, we're just going to call it khaki for now. This is also the jacket Sergeant Horvath is wearing in Saving Private Ryan, which makes sense for his character. He's a vet, he's been through a lot, and he's managed to hold on to one of the better jackets that were available to US troops during the war, even though this wasn't standard issue for his unit. Up next, one of the other uniforms you might see is the M42 Parachute Jump Uniform. Same khaki color that we saw on the tanker jacket, but this one is specially designed for airborne troops. It's got 4 big pockets, it's a bit longer, and it's got a built-in belt with a buckle. These were worn by the 82nd and 101st Airborne when they jumped into Normandy, so all the paratroopers you see in Saving Private Ryan, for example, and everybody in the first 3 episodes of Band of Brothers are all wearing one of these. And number 3, which is probably the most common field uniform jacket you're going to see throughout the Normandy campaign, is the M41 Field Jacket or Parson Jacket. This is also khaki, or OD3, has a short crop at the waist, but it doesn't have an elastic collar like we saw with the tanker jacket. This is the Tom Hanks jacket from Saving Private Ryan. It's what you're going to see on just about everybody that's not a paratrooper in the opening months of the Normandy campaign. Now, you're probably wondering, why did I bother tell you about 3 uniforms that aren't the M43? Well, I've got a good reason for this. And that's because the development of the M43 was a direct result of the Army's learnings from how all these other uniforms performed in the field. The M41 jacket, the Tom Hanks jacket there, received plenty of complaints from GIs on the front lines. First and foremost being that it was too light. It didn't protect the wearer well enough against the wind and rain, and it barely had any insulation. This might be fine and dandy for warmer environments, but as the weather begins to turn in Northern Europe, not so good. In addition, the khaki didn't blend in well with the environment of Northern Europe. Picture the famous Gripes Go Up scene from Saving Private Ryan. Look how those OD3 khaki uniforms stand out against the foliage. Not great. Sure, this scene was filmed in the UK, but it's the same general climate, so bear with me here. Now, the paratrooper uniform that the US Airborne Divisions used on D-Day, the M42, was better, but much like its counterpart, it was also too thin. While insulation was still a real problem, the biggest issue here was that the paratroopers put these uniforms through the ringer, and the material simply didn't stand up to it all. Many men and whole units in the 82nd and 101st made their own modifications to their jump uniforms to account for this problem, sewing reinforced patches onto high-stress areas like the elbows, the knees, the crotch, etc. And while these stopgaps were effective enough, after the Normandy campaign, the airborne divisions wanted something better. Finally, the tanker uniform was very much appreciated, but there simply weren't enough of them to go around for everybody, so at the end of the day, the Army had to do something. What they ended up with was this M43 uniform that you see here today. And this uniform would be adopted by US Infantry divisions and US Airborne divisions with the intention of phasing out and replacing the earlier M41 Field and M42 Paratrooper uniforms. The features to look out for on the M43 are all answers to the issues that we just discussed. First up, number 1, you can see that the uniform is a darker shade of olive drab. The M43 was made in what's called olive drab number 7 versus the OD3 that all the others came in, and this was found to be a better camouflage color in Northern Europe. Up next, this guy's got a whole bunch of pockets with flaps and snaps. It's great for regular infantrymen, it's great for paratroopers, everybody's got a lot of junk to carry around, so big pockets are great. The paratrooper doesn't lose any pockets, this still has 4 big pockets like the M42, but it's a considerable upgrade for anybody that had the M41. And number 3, perhaps the most important part, it's longer, it's a thicker fabric, and it has better outdoor weatherproof properties than its earlier counterparts. The extra length gives you a bit better protection from the elements. This jacket now breaks above the knees rather than at the waist, and it can be paired with a liner for additional insulation. In addition, the M43 has buttons around the collar for a detachable hood, which offered a nice bit of protection from the rain and snow. As I mentioned earlier, the M42 paratrooper uniform is what everybody's wearing in the first 3 episodes of Band of Brothers, and in the final 7 episodes, it's the M43. So all the scenes during Market Garden, during the Bulge, and on into Germany, those are all this guy right here, the M43. There are a few exceptions. Some guys held on to their M42s, but almost everybody is now in the M43 uniform. Another interesting point, in the movie Fury, the only member of the Fury crew that's wearing an M43 is Norman. And this all makes sense because Norman is a replacement. He was drawn from a non-tanker unit and thrown in with the rest of the veteran tankers who all wear the standard winter tanker uniform in OD3. Norman stands out not just because of his green status, but because of his green uniform. It's kind of neat. So now you know how to identify an M43. This jacket and the pants and boots that accompanied it, which we'll save for another day, were all supposed to phase out the infantry uniforms that we talked about earlier, but due to supply chain constraints and preparation for the Normandy invasion, it took until later in the fall of 1944 for these to start being adequately rolled out to troops in the field. Now, this is a scale modeling channel, of course, so now we ought to learn how to paint up one of these uniforms. Stay tuned for my next video, where we'll learn a quick and easy process for replicating this uniform right here on your figures. And in the meantime, be well, happy building, cheers.